The story I'm about to share with you happened to me about 13 years ago. I feel I need to give some background context, so please stick with me. I had taken my friend and his dog to the vet. When we arrived, we checked in, and no more than 5 minutes later, a good friend of ours called Dan came out of one of the rooms with his cat. Now, I hadn't seen much of Dan in the last year or so, but we often used to hang out, play guitar, and he would show me all of his bonsai trees. I would often call him Mr. Miyagi, as he had an almost unhealthy obsession with them. We sat down for 10 minutes, having a good catch-up, and he was telling us how he'd not been well and that he had just had an operation. He pulled down the side of his trousers to reveal a huge scar on his leg. He told us he was bedridden for 3 months. He was telling us how he was going to get some traditional Japanese koi tattoos to cover the scar. He then told us that we might hear some bizarre rumors that he had died, and obviously none of them were true. We kinda joked, saying he had put on some weight and it was probably for the best that he hadn't died, as no one would be able to carry him. We sat and talked for another 10 minutes or so when his name was called as the medication for his cat was ready to collect. He went to collect and then very abruptly came back, shook our hands, and said he had to go and left. A couple of days later, I received a text from my sister saying that he had passed away. I told her it was just a rumor, as I had just seen him 2 days ago. Shortly after, my Facebook feed started to fill with condolences to Dan and his family. He passed away 2 nights before from a blood clot related to his operation. I saw him on the last day he was alive. It seemed so surreal. I was only 26 at the time and had never lost such a close friend before. 2 weeks later, it was Dan's funeral. The crematorium was so packed they were queuing out the door to get inside. Most people didn't even get inside. That night, I went home and went to bed and eventually fell asleep. I don't recall if I had a dream or not, but I suddenly woke up with this feeling of being forced into the bed, like an unseeable weight was on top of me, pushing me down. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It felt like something had its hand around my throat as I tried to take a breath. I used all my force to try and break free, but it felt worthless. I felt the need to breathe more and more as I lay there trying to break free of whatever it was. I suddenly felt a release and I took a huge gasp of air. Trying to gain my breath back, I looked around the room. I can't quite explain it, but I felt a presence next to me. I stared into the darkness, and I know something was staring back at me. There was a presence, and it wasn't human. I didn't feel scared, despite being unable to breathe or move only moments ago. I just felt like something was there with me. Was it my friend Dan, coming to let me know he was okay? Was it something else? I'm not quite sure, but I know something was there that night, watching me from the darkness. Sleep paralysis isn't something new to me. I've suffered from this condition since I was a teenager, probably due to my home life and PTSD growing up. But this story isn't about my childhood trauma, thankfully. If you don't know what sleep paralysis is, it's basically when you wake up suddenly from REM, and although your brain is technically awake, your body is unfortunately still in REM mode, and you cannot move, which can cause the feeling of being paralyzed in your own body, aware but unable to do anything about it. People with this condition often see things. Hallucinations are what I mean. Some might be mild, but others might be your worst nightmare come to life. I had one of those nightmares a week ago. It started similarly to every previous experience. I woke up to being paralyzed in my bed, and like I mentioned before, since I'm so used to sleep paralysis, I didn't panic at first and tried to stay calm. I let my body fully relax for what felt like a few minutes before I tried getting up. Surprise, surprise, I couldn't. I tried a couple more times, and the panic that wasn't there before started to build up in my chest. I knew that if I couldn't move within a certain amount of time, the hallucinations would start. But awareness didn't do anything to stop them from manifesting. When I was able to get up, I cried with relief and ran to my bedroom door to try to get out of the darkness of my room. But when I opened the door, I found myself looking back up at my bedroom ceiling. The fan was turning fast, and I felt dread deep in my heart. I struggled in my body, screaming to my sisters, who were my roommates, to help. But of course, No words came out, and I was completely stuck in my body. After enough struggle, I got off my bed and ran, again, for my bedroom door. I managed to scream this time for my family, and I felt the carpet beneath me as I ran, and I felt the cold metal of the doorknob as I turned it. I knew that I was awake this time. I was close to safety. I opened the door, and when I looked up, I was back to looking up at the ceiling in my bed again. The cycle repeated over and over until I felt like I'd be trapped forever. I felt myself stop trying, feeling utterly defeated and alone. After what felt like hours, but must have been minutes, passed, I felt my joints relax. But still, my mind was untrusting. I tested my fingers first, moving one at a time, and then wiggled my toes. When those movements felt real, I tried sitting up. My bed made a sound, and I felt my blanket fall off me. I stood on shaking legs as I eyed the door, scared to make any sudden move. I found the courage to stand up and took a deep breath. I was scared, so I thought running to the door would help get the nerves out. I counted to 3 and ran. My hand touched the doorknob, and I knew it felt real before, but this time, it really did feel real. Before I could turn the knob, a cold, bony hand grabbed my neck from behind and started to squeeze. I tried to scream, but whatever held me cut off my windpipe, so only a wheeze sounded out. The creature brought me close to its chest, its body so cold, slimy, and almost skeletal, like a walking corpse. It whispered something in my ear that I still can't get out of my head a week later. "You belong to me. There will never be an escape." It then laughed wickedly until I was suddenly lying in the bed again, in tears, and finally fully awake. I ran out the door and wanted to wake my sisters up, but it was 3 a.m. I stayed up the rest of the early morning until the sun came out, and even then I was shaking as I tried to get a couple more hours of sleep. I'm terrified to sleep again. I'm scared to see whatever the hell it was, and I'm scared it was right. That one day I wouldn't be able to escape when I got sleep paralysis again. That one day I will truly belong to it. The first time I experienced the phenomena people refer to as a sleep paralysis demon, I was at home in bed. I remember as clear as day that I thought I had woken up. The room was still dark, obviously, but I knew where I was, knew what was happening, and was about to shift onto my side to readjust positions and go back to sleep, when I suddenly realized that I couldn't. I tried again, and felt as I did a wave of blind panic creeping over me. I couldn't shift my body, or change my position, or even cry out for help. I was frozen in place, unable to move a muscle. I tried with every ounce of my being to prevent myself from panicking, to tell myself that this must be a dream, that people don't just wake up paralyzed. There has to be some cause. But even then, there was another part of me, a tiny, gnawing worm of doubt that was chewing through my attempts to be calm. Probing and questioning, asking whether maybe I had seen a documentary once, or heard on the news about brain dysfunctions or tropical diseases that could do this to a person. Things that could go wrong and mean that the victim remained completely conscious and aware, but trapped, unable to communicate inside their own bodies. If you were dreaming, the voice said, would you really be thinking things through like this? Would you be asking whether you're awake or not? I tried looking left and right and was slightly relieved to find that my eyes moved, but I was still in a blaze of panic at the idea that nothing else was working. I tried over and over to scream and call out, attempting to force the sound up and out of my lungs, when just to my right, I saw something move. A shape, indistinct but dark like a shadow, seemed to glide slowly across the scene just on the edge of vision. At first, I thought it might be smoke or some kind of steam, but as I stared ahead, I saw all at once that the dark outline had taken on a different shape. It was a person. Or if not a person, at least the outline and shape of a man, but made like a silhouette, entirely made from darkness. There was no color, no glimmer of highlight coming off this shape, and yet I could see it as it moved its heavy, rigid solidity. It was not a shadow, but a thing with weight and form. I tried again to scream, and as I did, the shape suddenly descended, sinking lower and almost out of view until I felt a hideous weight across my thighs and hips, a thin single point of pressure on my stomach and another on my chest. The points of weight I realized were hands, the larger weight the body, as this person, this thing, was climbing on top of me, holding me down and slinking like a giant lizard slowly up my body, closer and closer to my face. Again and again I tried to move, to flail and thrash, to swing at the thing, knock it to the ground and run for my life. But of course, I couldn't. Instead, I lay perfectly still, paralyzed and staring as this thing's face, a sheet of deepest black, came closer. 2 staring eyes, like diamonds, appeared inches from my face. Somewhere below those eyes I knew there was a mouth. There must have been, because a voice, like some dark syrup, slithered out and into my ears, telling me over and over, "You can't move when you're like this. You can't move because you're mine. My little plaything, to do with as I please." Moments later, I awoke, sitting bolt upright in bed, still feeling the heavy weight of the thing perched and resting on my chest. I flung back the sheets, swung my legs out of the bed, and with my back to the wall, looked around the room, surveying every corner and every space, looking for an intruder, for the thing that had slithered into my room and climbed atop my prone, defenseless body. The experience was terrifying. It was one that, given a choice, I would never have repeated again. That same day, I researched the incident, looking to see if others had ever experienced the same thing. I found that the vision, almost always the same, is quite common, that many people around the world have seen or regularly see a sleep paralysis demon, a hallucination caused by the mind waking up slightly before the body. The body, still in sleep mode, remains paralyzed, while the mind, unable to react, hallucinates. It was a convincing explanation, but no more reassuring. I could at first have gotten some comfort from the fact that others had experienced the exact same thing as me, that I wasn't alone in my experience. But that was only at first. Since then, I've experienced variants of this phenomena that are unlike any that I've read about with others, and which had dire consequences for me. I said at the outset that the first time I experienced the sleep paralysis demon, I was at home in my bed. This has not always been the case. 2 years ago, I experienced paralysis and the demon during the early evening. I was not at home in bed. I was driving. I had been driving huge articulated vehicles for long-haul transport for almost 10 years at that point, and had never once fallen asleep at the wheel of a truck. Part of me finds it hard to believe that I fell asleep this time. You see, there was no gap, no passage of time or distance between waking and being paralyzed, even for a few seconds. Surely if I fell asleep, then I should have traveled some. A portion of time should have elapsed. But no. 1 minute I was driving down the highway. The next, I simply couldn't move, and sitting on my lap, its finger pressed to my lips, was that awful thing. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't make a sound. Not that I really needed to. The screeching tires, the crunch of metal and wailing high-pitched screaming meant there was more than enough sound already. Thankfully, no one died that day, but I got a jail sentence for reckless driving.